Virginia Giuffre's allegations against Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor may have marked a turning point, but Andrew Loney's latest revelations expose a pattern long preceding them. For years, Andrew maintained close ties to Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein, figures central to one of the most scrutinized abuse scandals in recent. What's now emerging is how these associations weren't incidental. They were integral to the way Andrew operated, with Maxwell reportedly acting as a social conduit, ushering him into elite circles teeming with young, impressionable women. These were not one-off incidents, but symptoms of a lifestyle cultivated over decades, with help from friends, staff, and silence. If you love getting the real story behind the palace walls, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell so you never miss an update. Segment: PA Prince Andrew. Photos. What makes this more than just scandalous is the brazenness of its repetition. From diplomatic contact facilitating encounters to post-divorce relationships marred by crude behavior and boundary violations, the through line is consistency. The danger now isn't just reputational, it's legal and institutional. With more files expected to surface, what's at stake isn't only Andrew's standing, but the trustworthiness of the systems that allowed him to operate with impunity for so long. Segment: A.L. Andrew Loney. Photos. What began as a slow unraveling following his ties to Jeffrey Epstein has now been blown wide open by royal biographer Andrew Loney. In his book The Rise and Fall of the House of York, Loney presents a damning narrative. That Andrew wasn't just a man of poor judgment or questionable friends, but the central figure in an entrenched, years-long system that allegedly exploited his position, blurred boundaries, and leaned heavily on taxpayer-funded resources, all to satisfy his personal interests. And those personal interests, according to the book, were specific and unsettling. We're talking about a reported preference for blondes and ballet dancers, not as passing attractions, but as deliberate targets. Andrew allegedly used his position, and more importantly, the people around him, to facilitate encounters. This wasn't a case of a single scandalous night out. These were regular arrangements, coordinated through what's described as a network of staff, associates, and diplomatic figures. Staff members, whose salaries came from public money, were reportedly directed to engage with women on Andrew's behalf. And not subtly, either. Some were allegedly instructed to approach women in nightclubs, others in hotels, events, parties, anywhere that provided a backdrop for an introduction. Add in diplomatic contacts. If you love getting the real story behind the palace walls, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell so you never miss an update. And it goes from questionable to outright abuse of public trust. One diplomat's frustrated response said it all: "I'm a diplomat, not a pimp." That quote cuts to the core of how far this behavior allegedly crossed professional lines. Segment: ENB English National Ballet. Folder not found. Create new folder. English National Ballet. And while that alone is disturbing enough, it didn't end with a few misused invites. It extended into his public-facing roles. Specifically, his long-standing position as a patron of the English National Ballet. From the outside, it looked like an honorary role, standard for a royal. But insiders reportedly claim it became another access point. That his patronage wasn't about cultural advocacy, but about proximity to dancers, to the type of women he was consistently reported to pursue. Those seated in the royal box, often women from his personal life, not officials or philanthropists. The ballet became another venue for curated social optics, a blend of public duty and private preference. Taken alone, these details might raise eyebrows. Taken together, they form a pattern Loney asserts is built on entitlement, reinforced by silence, and normalized within Andrew's royal lifestyle for decades. And then there's the history. Andrew's post-divorce relationships were never simple. His ties to women like Aurelia Seal and Koo Stark added fuel to long-standing rumors that his public image as a charming prince was far from a full story. Allegations of inappropriate remarks, crude behavior, fixation on younger women. None of this surfaced overnight. These are behaviors reportedly observed, documented, and whispered about for years. But as always, proximity to power provided a buffer. Until it didn't. His connection to Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein remains a cornerstone of the scandal. Maxwell, convicted for her role in Epstein's abuse network, wasn't a background character in Andrew's life. She was reportedly central to it, his access point to high society, and more significantly, to women. Loney's account emphasizes how Maxwell's social influence and connections may have helped create the insulated world Andrew lived in, one where introductions were handled for him, scrutiny was minimized, and accountability never landed. Then came Virginia Giuffre. Her allegations shook the already crumbling foundation. Her claims weren't just accusations. They were supported by evidence, timelines, and eventually a financial settlement. Though Andrew has always denied wrongdoing, his decision to settle out of court was seen by many as an implicit admission that taking the case to trial could have revealed even more damaging truths. And that's what makes this so dangerous to the royal family. Because Loney's account doesn't just implicate Andrew, it hints at institutional failure, a royal system that looked the other way, a hierarchy where deference was valued over ethics, where staff and diplomats allegedly felt compelled to serve not just a crown, but the private interest of someone who exploited their silence. And now, with more documents expected to be released, this story is nowhere near done. Legal experts have pointed out that Andrew's legal exposure remains real, especially if he were to set foot in jurisdictions where investigations are still active. For now, he remains in the UK, residing at Windsor with full-time security, still protected, still untouchable, at least legally. But publicly, his image is gone. Reputationally, his a liability, not just to himself, but to the entire royal institution. And the palace knows it. That's why his titles were removed. That's why he's been kept out of major royal events. But keeping him off the balcony doesn't erase what's already been documented and what could still come to light. Because Loney's biography doesn't just point fingers. It draws connections between Andrew's behavior and the people who allowed it, between individual misconduct and systemic enablement, between unchecked power and the cost of silence. And if further allegations emerge, as many expect they will, the royal family won't be able to frame Andrew as an isolated problem. Not when former staffers, diplomatic officials, and insiders have already started sharing how deeply embedded this pattern was. It's no longer about one man's fall from grace. It's about what that fall reveals. Segment, UKRF UK Royal Family. Photos, that power, when protected from consequence, becomes dangerous. That institutions built on silence will always crack under truth. And that the public is no longer willing to accept tradition as a substitute for transparency. Andrew's story may be the most glaring, but it's just the start of the reckoning. Because the moment you see how normalized his behavior allegedly was, the next question is, who else knew? Who else helped? And who else is still being protected? If the palace is hoping this will blow over, it's badly misjudged the moment. Public tolerance for these scandals is gone. The expectation for accountability have shifted. And no amount of centuries-old pomp can cover up the rot when it's laid bare this clearly. If you followed this saga and feel like we're still only scratching the surface, hit like. If you think more questions need to be asked, drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want every new twist, every buried file, and every fallout moment from the world of power and scandal, subscribe. This isn't over. Not even close. Segment, A.L. Andrew Loney. Photos. What we're witnessing isn't just a personal disgrace. It's a slow-motion collapse of royal credibility, brick by brick, scandal by scandal. And Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, the former Duke of York, is standing at the center of it all, not just as a fallen royal, but as a case study in how privilege corrodes accountability. Let's not forget, this isn't about rumors or vague innuendo. It's about allegations laid out in detail by respected royal biographer Andrew Loney, who spent years documenting the behavior, the network, the staff, the whispered complaints, and the very specific preferences that Andrew allegedly pursued with the help of a network of staff, protection officers, diplomatic contacts, all allegedly involved, knowingly or not, in what's being described as an organized effort to facilitate encounters between Andrew and women who matched his very particular taste, blondes and ballet dancers. Not acquaintances, not dates, not relationships, arrangements. That word alone says a lot. According to the allegations, this wasn't casual. This was structured, systemic, recurring, facilitated through layers of connections, and critically, through people who were supposed to be serving the public, security staff, officials, public servants. not personal liaisons. One diplomat's alleged remark, "I'm a diplomat, not a pimp," cuts to the heart of just how inappropriate this all was. This wasn't just a breach of ethics. It was a fundamental misuse of state resources, of institutional trust, of royal standing. And more than that, it was reportedly an open secret among those close enough to see how things operated. Segment, ENB English National Ballet. And the ballet angle? That's not some niche detail. That's central to how Andrew allegedly used his public-facing role for private gain. As patron of the English National Ballet, he had access to dancers, to performances, to high society events wrapped in cultural legitimacy. And what's been alleged is that Andrew treated those events not as public service, but as social hunting grounds. Reports suggest that instead of filling the royal box with relevant stakeholders or patrons of the arts, he regularly invited mistresses, acquaintances, or women he wanted to impress. This isn't speculation. It's part of the documented pattern Lonai presents. A pattern where even philanthropy became a front for self-indulgence. And if this had all ended there, it would still be a scandal. But it didn't. Segment, J.E. Jeffrey Epstein. Photos, because surrounding Andrew were connections that weren't just inappropriate, they were criminal. His relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, and by extension Ghislaine Maxwell, now looks far worse in hindsight. And it was never a one-time thing. Andrew visited Epstein's properties, stayed at his home, was photographed walking with him in New York after Epstein's conviction. There's no way to spin that into something innocent. Not when Virginia Giuffre came forward with allegations of abuse. Not when the lawsuit ended in a confidential but reportedly massive financial settlement. And not when the connections between Epstein, Maxwell, and Andrew form a triangle that's impossible to untangle without finding more rut. Segment, GM Ghislaine Maxwell. Photos, Maxwell, convicted of sex trafficking and exploitation, was reportedly central to Andrew's social life. She was the gatekeeper, the one introducing him to young women, the one arranging events, the one smoothing things over, the one who, according to many accounts, made Andrew's social world what it was. And what it was, according to this biography, was a bubble where the rules didn't apply. Segment, Isle Royal Lodge, photos, and even now, that bubble hasn't fully burst. Yes, his lost his honorary military titles. Yes, he's no longer referred to as His Royal Highness. Yes, he's been banished from the official balcony appearances and major royal events. But he still lives at Royal Lodge on the Windsor estate. He still received protection. He's still covered, literally and symbolically, by royal infrastructure. Segment, PA Prince Andrew. Photos, no charges have ever been brought against him. No formal investigation has been conducted by the UK authorities into the wider allegations raised in Loney's book. And while legal experts strongly advise Andrew against traveling to the US due to risks of being subpoenaed or further implicated, he remains insulated at home. Segment, UKRF UK Royal Family. Photos, that insulation is exactly the problem. Because when you take a man accused of exploiting public roles, misusing government resources, maintaining ties with convicted predators, and settling serious allegations out of court, and you still protect him with taxpayer-funded security, it sends a clear message: power protect itself, no matter the damage. And the damage? It's not just to Andrew, it's to the entire institution. The monarchy has always relied on a certain unspoken contract with the public. It doesn't matter if you love the royals or think they're outdated relics. Their survival depends on image, dignity, the appearance of duty, and scandals like this fracture the image in ways PR campaigns can't fix. Segment, A.L. Andrew Lonai. Photos, the public isn't as forgiving as it used to be. This isn't the 90s. We're living in a time of accountability, of digital receipts, of social pressure that doesn't fade after a newspaper cycle ends. And Andrew's story, especially with the allegations laid out by Lonai, isn't the kind that people forget, because the questions don't stop at what did Andrew do. They extend to who helped him. Who knew? Why didn't anyone stop it? And why is he still protected? These aren't just personal failings, they're institutional ones. Failings that suggest a culture of silence, of complicity, and of privilege so deep it can weather scandal after scandal without consequence. Segment, UKRF UK Royal Family. photos, and that's what's coming next. Because the release of more documents, more names, more testimonies, that's not a matter of if, it's when. And every time a new file drops, it chips away at the credibility of the palace. Not just for harboring Andrew, but for maintaining a system that allegedly enabled this to go on for years. People aren't asking for ceremonial punishment. They're asking for transparency, accountability, a sign that there's not a different set of rules for the elite. Because the monarchy doesn't just represent tradition, it represents power. And when power is used to shield misconduct, people start to question everything. Segment, A.L. Andrew Loney, photos. Where this goes next depends on what comes out. More documents, more pressure, possibly more legal risk if the investigations abroad start connecting new dots. But one thing's certain, the royal family can't afford to keep Andrew hidden forever. The public is watching. The press is watching. And now, thanks to Andrew Loney's book, the curtain has been pulled back further than ever before. Segment, Isle Royal Lodge, photos. And here's the part that really sticks. After everything, after the allegations, after the BBC disaster, after the Jewfrey settlement, after being stripped of his titles, Andrew still lives on royal grounds. Royal Lodge, to be specific. He still has 24/7 security. Still operates under protective umbrella of an institution that, for decades, placed loyalty to bloodline over accountability. This is the heart of the outrage. It's not just a behavior, though that in itself is more than enough. It's the consequences, or lack thereof. For the public, there's a clear double standard playing out in real time. Anyone else, any average person accused of what Andrew's been accused of, linked to the people he's been linked to, involved in the kind of systemic exploitation outlined in Andrew Loney's book, would not be enjoying this level of quiet luxury. But Andrew is. Segment, E.M. Emily Mateless, photos, and the optics of that are catastrophic. Every new photo of him riding horses on royal grounds, every report confirming he still has security funded by the crown, every refusal to cooperate with U.S. authorities, it reinforces a perception that royalty means immunity, that even when titles are stripped, the real privilege remains untouched. And the worst part? It wasn't hidden. This wasn't a buried scandal. These were not quiet whispers from obscure corners of the media. The world watched as Andrew defended himself on national television, with excuses that became late-night punchlines. The I don't sweat line. The Pizza Express alibi. The robotic lack of empathy. It was, as many commentators said, a masterclass in how not to handle a scandal. Segment, A.L. Andrew Loney, photos. And yet, despite the backlash, despite the mockery, despite the public disgust, nothing truly changed. Not structurally. Not institutionally. He stepped back, but he didn't face consequences in the way the rest of society would expect. That's the tragedy here. Not just the alleged behavior, but what it says about the entire ecosystem around him. A palace machine that protected him for years. Staff who, according to Loney's findings, were roped into helping arrange encounters. Diplomats who were allegedly used as intermediaries for personal gain. A network designed to serve the whims of one man, fueled by deference, status, and fear of challenging power. And you have to ask, if this could happen around Andrew, who else has been protected? Because that's where this goes next. When an institution enables this level of misconduct, or at the very least, turns a blind eye to it, it begs a much bigger question about what else has been buried. How many complaints went ignored? How many staffers were dismissed or silenced? How many women were brought into Andrew's orbit without knowing what they were stepping into? The story Andrew Loney tells isn't just about Andrew. It's about an entire royal culture that prioritized reputation over responsibility. It's about a family business that claims to modernize with every generation, yet still can't publicly confront one of its own when faced with this level of documented misconduct. Segment, UKRF UK Royal Family, photos, and then there's a risk ahead. The expected release of more documents, more files, more testimonies. It's not just the past being picked apart. It's a potential for more names, more victims, more officials who were involved, even peripherally. Because with each layer peeled back, the picture becomes clearer. This wasn't an isolated prince going off script. This was a system that allowed it to happen. And the monarchy knows it. That's why they move so quickly, eventually, to distance themselves. That's why he was stripped of titles. That's why he's never coming back to public duty. But the public knows the difference between symbolic gestures and actual accountability. A man who settled an abuse lawsuit, who was friends with Epstein and Maxwell, who allegedly used public servants to arrange women, and who continues to live a protected life, isn't dealt with. His shielded segment, BP Buckingham Palace, photos, and that makes everything worse. It makes the palace's silence feel like complicity. It makes their refusal to comment seem strategic, not respectful. And it drags the entire royal brand through the mud. Because if they can't handle this with transparency and truth, how can they claim to represent dignity? You can feel the shift in public tone. This isn't a quirky royal embarrassment. It's a serious scandal with international implications. And as each revelation lands, that shift becomes irreversible. Andrew can't rehabilitate his image. Not anymore. There's no charm tour, no glossy interview, no royal handshake event that can undo what's been alleged. His name will always be tied to this, to the network, to the allegations, to the Epstein connection, and the monarchy's handling of it will be a permanent stain on their... So where does this go? Legal risk still hangs over Andrew's head, especially abroad. He hasn't been charged with anything, but legal experts are clear. If he travels to the U.S., he could be vulnerable to civil or criminal action, depending on what new evidence comes out. The palace may be protecting him from that possibility simply by keeping him close, on home soil, under the radar, and far from anything resembling accountability. Segment, UKRF UK royal family, photos, but as we've seen, you can't suppress public memory. Not anymore. Not in an era of receipts, relentless media scrutiny, and online pressure that refuses to die down after a few news cycles. This is going to follow the monarchy. Every coronation, every state event, every carefully crafted message about service and duty will be met with a question. What about Andrew? And until that question is fully answered, until there's transparency, not PR management, not quiet settlements, but real answers, the scandal isn't... So yes, Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor may never return to royal duties. But that's not the resolution. That's not justice. That's just the monarchy trying to outlast the outrage. It won't work. Because every new detail, from the ballot box elections to the misuse of security staff to connections with Maxwell, isn't just a bad look. It's a systemic issue. One that strikes at the very heart of what the royal family claims to be. If you're still following this and you're stunned that this level of alleged abuse of power has been protected for so long, let your voice be heard. Like the video, share it, comment with your thoughts on how the monarchy should respond, and subscribe for more coverage as this story unfolds. Because the files aren't done, the revelations aren't done, and we're not done either. This scandal isn't ancient history. It's still happening, and the silence, it's louder than ever.